We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 104b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a brisa with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha was talking about a case where the malva, he takes a mashkon from the lova, and then at some point in time, the malva gives that mashkon, he gives that security, that collateral back to the lova, back to the borrower, and they wrote into the shtar that the lova owes that back to the malva at any point in time. The malva might come and collect that collateral back from the lova. And so the Gemara asked, why does that need to be written up? Isn't it automatic? The malva has already acquired that security. He's acquired that collateral. What do you need to write anything into the shtar for? And the Gemara now answers, Ahani ksiva legiron. The reason why you write it down is, let's say it goes down in value. We're trying to say that the lova owes that value. Rashi explains, Ahani ksiva legiron, hashtar moel livchos damav. The document helps in terms of when the value goes down, which means as follows, Im yivchesu demei hamashkon shenishtamish bo halova. Let's say the value of the security actually went down. The lova was using it, it went down in value. So now, when he's going to give the security back to the malva, yipara mishar nechasav, he has to pay from his other property, kechol hakosav v'shtar, like everything that was written into the shtar. That's why it is effective to write this into the shtar, so that that value will be returned to the malva when the collateral is given back to the malva. And the Gemara continues with another Tana that's Doresh Lashon Hedyot. Rabbi Yossi haya Doresh Lashon Hedyot. Rabbi Yossi as well, he would expound upon the common language used in contracts. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Mokom shenoagu lasos ksuba milva, in a place where they would make the ksuba into a loan. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Gova milva, then it's collected as a loan. Lichfol, if it's a place where they doubled it. Gova mechsa, then it would be collected half. And Nahar B'loi, Gavu Tilsa, Nahar B'loi, they would collect a third. And Rashi explains, Mokom shenagu lasos ksuba milva, shekol ma shekosa b'shtar ksubasa, everything written into her shtar ksuba, v'dein nedunya d'hanola slemi bein noshel v'eis bala v'chulu. Essentially, when she got married, she would bring in a dowry into the marriage. The father-in-law would provide a bunch of money to the married couple, and that was written into the ksuba. And the idea was, nifras mimenu kishenesar malo neskarsha, let's say she'd become a widow, or she was divorced, she would collect that amount. That's why it was written into the ksuba. And she would collect it kederech shebal chov nifra, in the same way that a creditor collects. Kechol hakosa b'shtar milva, everything that's written in the shtar milva, kegon shekosvin bo kemoshan ukosvin achrayas dana kabila saloi, again written in the same formulation as a regular shtar milva. So then the brisa says, Rabbi Yossi says, gova milva, it's collected as a loan. What that means is as follows: Bal gova me avi habas, the husband collects from the father-in-law, kol ma shekosa b'chsubasa, everything that's written in the ksuba, ki ilu hilveyu, as if it is a loan, meaning to say the husband is essentially taking that exact amount of the dowry from the father-in-law, and it's kind of like a loan, because in a situation where he dies, or let's say he divorces her, he's going to have to pay back that exact amount. That's in a place where they make it as a loan. But Mokom shenagu lichfol, there were places where they would put in double, meaning Loshem esmasha machneses lo kiflayim bedomav. Whatever she was bringing into the marriage, they would actually double it. B'shvil kavod, that was a way of showing honor, wanted to show as though the father-in-law is providing way more than he's actually providing. So let's say provided a certain amount, they would write double into the contract. V'lichtov kiflayim b'chsubasa, they would write double that amount into her ksuba. Ucheshehi yotza, and in those places, when she actually leaves the marriage, she's widowed or divorced, she's only going to get paid half. That's what it means, that in a place where it was lichfol, in a place where the custom was to double that amount into the contract, they would only collect half. And this is the idea that he's expounding upon whatever the common language in the contract was. Gova hachasan mechamav mechsan. Again, the idea is that the son-in-law is only going to get half from the father-in-law in the first place, and that's why after the marriage ends, she's going to get half that amount. And then it said Nahar B'loi, they collected 1/3, because they would put 3 times the amount into the contract. But finally, the Gemara continues, Mereimar, when it came to Mereimar's opinion, Magvi Nami Shivcha. So he said, no, she can get everything that's written into the ksuba, even if it was more. Rashi says, Migvi Shivcha, Kol Masha Yakosev V'Kofel, Hayagova Me'avi Habas. Everything that was written in there, he would collect from the father-in-law, and therefore the entire amount would actually be collected. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravina leMereimar. So Ravina said to Mereimar, what does that mean? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, lichfol gova mechsa. It says the exact opposite. If the custom is to double it, you're only going to collect half. You're not going to get all of it. And the Gemara says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Ha de kani minei, ha de lo kani minei. It depends. In one case, we're talking where you actually formalized it as a kinyan, so then it's a real obligation, you have to pay the entire amount. But if you didn't formalize that as a kinyan, so then again, if the custom is to double it, so he's really only going to receive half. And Rashi says, ha de kanu minei me'avi abbas. If you made a kinyan, a formalized kinyan, together with the father-in-law, so then again, he's going to owe the entire amount. And the Gemara continues with a story along these lines. Ravina meshabach v'chosav levrate. Ravina, he enhanced the ksuba and wrote more than he intended to give on behalf of his daughter when she was getting married. Amrule, so they said to him, meaning the family of the groom, they said to Ravina, Nikna minei damar, let's make a formal acquisition for this. Amar lahu, he said to them, Mikna lo michval, well, if I'm going to make a formal acquisition, then I'm not going to double the amount, because then I'm actually going to owe that amount. And michval, if I'm doubling the amount, so lo mikna, we're not going to make a formal acquisition, because again, he just intended to enhance the value in the ksuba, but he was not intending on giving that much. And the Gemara continues, How gavra da amar lahu, there was a person who said to them, meaning to say he was dying, and he gave the following instruction. He said, Havula arba meya zuzi livrati bichsubas. He said, give 400 zuz to my daughter in her ksuba. And the question was, what exactly did he mean? Shalach Ravacha brei de Ravavya, lakame de Ravashi. Ravacha, the son of Ravavi, he sent this case in front of Ravashi, and he said, Arba meya di'inun tamne meya. Did he mean to say 400, but he really means to say right into the contract 800, and we're going to give half, we're actually going to give 400. Oh, Arba meya zuzi, or maybe he meant 400 should be written in di'inun masan, which means he's actually giving only 200. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Ravashi, Ravashi says, Chazinan, we have to see. Iyamar havula arba meya zuzi, if he said give her 400 zuz, so then di'inun tamne meya, then it means to say that he's writing in there 800 because he's actually giving the 400. But if he said ksovula arba meya zuz, if he said write for her 400 zuz, then di'inun masan, that means that he's just giving 200 zuz. And the Gemara continues, Ika di'amri, there are those that say, Amar Ravashi said as follows, a different version of Ravashi's response, Chazinan, we have to see. Iyamar lichsu basa, if the way he phrased it was lichsu vasa, meaning to say for her ksuba, so then arba meya zuze, then he's really giving 400 di'inan tamni meya, which is 800 written into the ksuba. V'yamar bichsu basa, but if he says in her ksuba, so then arba meya zuze, then the 400 zuz is being written into the ksuba, di'inan masan, which is actually only 200. But the Gemara then says on the second version, Velohi, it's not really true. Loshna da'amar lichsu basa, veloshna da'amar bichsu basa. It doesn't matter if he says with a lamed or with a beis, lichsu basa or bichsu basa. Arba meya zuze di'inun masan. It always means 400 zuz written in, because he's mentioning the ksuba, and it really means 200. Da'amar havulastam, unless he says just give it to her, he doesn't mention the ksuba at all. If he says give it to her, then he really means to say give her 400. And the Gemara continues, how Gavra de Kavelara Mechavre, there was a person who leased land from his friend, and the idea was, again, he's going to pay him like a sharecropper. And Amar, he said, Imo Varnala, let's say I don't do anything with the land, if I don't work it, Yahivna Loch Alpha Zuzi, I'm going to give you 1,000 zuz. What ended up happening was, over at Tilsa, he ended up not working 1/3 of the land. So Amri Nahardoi, so they said in Nahardoi, Dina hu duyoiv le, the halach is that he has to give him tlos meya v'tilsin utlos of v'tilsi. He has to give him 333 1/3, meaning 1/3 of 1,000. He said he was going to give 1,000 if he didn't work it at all. So if he didn't work 1/3 of it, he has to give 1/3 of the amount, 333 1/3. But Rava says no, asmachta. This is just considered to be an asmachta. The asmachta lo kanyan, and asmachta is not going to be a kinyan, meaning to say he didn't really, in his heart, he was not really meaning to give this money. It's just essentially an exaggeration, and therefore he doesn't know anything in this situation. But the Gemara continues, but according to Rava, what's the difference from what we learned in the Mishnah, im over velo avid, where he says, if I don't work the land, so then ashalim b'meitzvah, then I'm going to pay you with the very best produce. So there we say he does owe the produce. Why over here do we say it's an asmachta? And the Gemara answers simply, Hasam lo kagazim, over there's no exaggeration. And so therefore we take that commitment seriously. But over here, Kevan de Ka'amar Milsi Yiserta, since he said in a very large amount of money, much larger, it seems to be exaggerated. Guzma bi'almahu de kagazim. It just seems that he's exaggerating, and therefore it's not officially something that he owes. And Rashi explains, Lo Guzmi, he's not exaggerating in the case of the Mishnah. Eno Makabel Olav Davar Guzmi, he's not accepting some exaggerated amount upon himself. Elikamishpat, this is actually what's just. Velav Asmachta, that's not called an Asmachta, Dahachi Afsadeh, because that's what he really made him lose. That's why he actually owes that in the case of our Mishnah. But if he says an exaggerated amount, that is not a true commitment. And the Gemara continues, how Gavra de Kavelara Lashumshame, there was a person who leased land and he was going to grow sesame and again give a portion to the owner as a sharecropper. Instead, Zarachiti, instead what he did was he planted wheat, but of the Chiti Kishumshame, and the wheat ended up being as valuable as the sesame. In general, when a person plants the land with sesame, it has a higher amount of profit, but it weakens the land. In this particular case, he ended up making the same profit with the wheat as he would have with the sesame, and there was no weakening of the land. So Savar of Kahana Lamemer, so Rav Kahana thought the same, that the owner has to deduct the amount that the land would have been weakened, because the owner over here saved. By this person planting wheat instead of sesame, the land has not gone down in value and he ended up making the same profit, so maybe the sharecropper can deduct a little from what he was going to give to the owner. Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana, Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, it's not true. Amri Inshi, people say, Kich Sha'ara, let the land be weakened, velo lichosh mara, but don't let the owner be weakened, meaning to say, the owner doesn't mind if the land is going to be weakened a little, he just wants his full profit, and therefore in this situation you can't deduct for the fact that the land was not weakened, because the owner would actually prefer that the land was weakened and he'd rather take his full profits. And Rashi explains, Amar Lei said to him, Amri Inshi, people say, Kocha Shara, let the land be weakened and not the owner. Kilomar, what it means to say is, Hayalo Lizroa Shumshamin, the sharecropper should have planted sesame. Afilo Haisa Mecheshes Karka Yoser, even if that would have weakened the land more. Velo Yichosh Mara, better not to weaken the owner, Lito Lachsho Pachos, that he should take less right now, V'yirav Hu Veso, and now he and his family are going to starve. He's actually more interested in the short-term profits than in the long-term viability of the land. And the Gemara continues, how Gavra de Kavelara Lashumshmi, there was a person who accepted the land as a sharecropper, and he was supposed to plant sesame. Zara Chiti, he ended up planting wheat instead of sesame, and Avda Chiti Tfei Min Shumshmi, it ended up that the wheat produced more profit than the sesame. Savar Ravina Lamemer, so Ravina thought to say, Yoiv Le Shivcha de Beini Beini, that the sharecropper should be entitled to the extra profit beyond what the sesame would have produced, meaning to say he gives the owner the profit that the sesame would have produced, and then the extra profit that he got because he planted wheat, he should be able to keep that for himself. Amar le Ravacha mi Difti le Ravina, Ravacha from Difti said to Ravina, Atuhu ashbach aralo ashbacha, do you think that it was only him? Do you think only the cultivator caused this great profit and the land did not? The land also contributed to the great amount of profit, and therefore they should divide that extra profit as well. And the Gemara continues, Amri Nahardoi, they said in Nahardoi, Hai iska palga milvu palga pikadon, when it comes to a joint venture, it's considered to be half loan and half deposit. Avud Rabbanan milsa denicha leila love v'nicha leila malva. The Rabbanan made an enactment that would be good for both the borrower and the lender. And Rashi explains, Hayiska, this joint venture, palga milvu, palga pikadon, it's half considered to be a loan and half is considered to be a deposit. Hamakavel pragmati me balabayas, the case is if somebody receives merchandise from the balabayas, this person is the manager, he's going to take this merchandise and try to make a profit with it. They evaluate what it's worth over here, in this location, and he's going to bring it to a place where it's more expensive, where he can sell it for a higher price. And the idea is that they're going to divide the profits. So we say in such a situation, Chatzi Achrayas onsim olav kamilva, half of it is considered that he has responsibility, meaning the manager has responsibility, as if it was a loan. Let's say the 50% of what was given, no matter what happens, he has to restore that 50% to the balabayas. V'chatzi achariyusa, but then half of the responsibility, al bailam, that goes on the owners, on the balabayas, kipikod, and that's considered to be like a deposit. And again, the idea over here is that they are splitting the potential profits, but they're also splitting any losses. And Rashi continues, Tikun Rabbanan hachtakanta denichalu letarvayu. The Rabbanan, they structure the arrangement in a way where there's benefits for both parties. And the Gemara continues, Hashta damrinan palga milva. Now that we're saying that half of it is considered to be a loan, so iboy lemishta beishichra shaper dami. So let's say he wants to take that 50%, which is a loan, and he just wants to use it to drink beer, meaning he doesn't really want to engage in a business venture with that 50%. He's allowed to do that because it's considered to be a loan, and he takes full responsibility on that 50%. Rashi says, Viboy lemishta beishichra imrotza lahotzi chetzia bahotzas beiso. Let's say he wants to spend 50% of it for his own house. Motzi, he can do do that. Share milva all of he, because it's just considered to be a loan. He's responsible for all of that in any case, and so he's allowed to do that. But the Gemara continues, Rava says he can't do that, lahachi karu layiska, because that's why it's called a joint venture. The Amar le, because he can say to him, meaning to say the balabayas can say to the manager, ki yahavina lach lasuke be v'lo lemishte be shechra. I gave you this because I want you to do business with it. I don't want you to use it in order to just drink beer. Rashi says, lasuke be demitoch shetistaker b'shalcha titrach v'tasuk boyafe, because of the fact that you're going to make a profit in your portion, so therefore you're going to try to work harder, and therefore I want you to use the entire thing, even the part that is fully your responsibility, the loan. I want you to use that to try to make a profit, because that's the whole idea. You're going to make a profit on your side, and that's why you're going to try to make a profit for me as well. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravidi Baravin, Ravidi Baravin says, V'im meis, let's say this manager dies, so nasa metaltal in eitzel banav, so then it has the status of metaltal and of movable objects by his children. And Rashi explains, V'im meis halov, if the borrower dies, that's again the manager, V'oiska kayemes biad banav, and so now his children, they have the merchandise, Chetzia shehi milva, that half which was a loan, nasas metaltal and eitzel banav, that becomes like movable objects by his children, V'ein habaylam goven mimenen, the Balabais is not allowed to collect from that from the orphans. The metaltali diyasmi lo mishtabdi lebal chov, because the halacha is movable objects of yisomim, of orphans, there's no lien on them when it comes to a creditor, and so essentially he's not able to collect that from the orphans. But the Gemara continues, Rava says that's not the case. Lahachi karu layiska, that's why it's called a joint venture. The amaze that if he dies, lo yasa metaltlin eitzel banav, it's not considered to be metaltlin by his children, and the owner is allowed to collect from that. And Rashi explains, Lahachi karu layiska, that's why they call it a joint venture. Shetahei kayemes tamidu misasik, but the whole idea is that it's always going to be around in order to do business with. The yismechu aleh baleh, and the owners, they rely upon it, shaloti nasin lotzia, that it's not just going to be spent and going to be lost. The amaze loven, so therefore if the borrower does die, yigbe, he can collect, velote asakim metaltal and shalahan, it doesn't count as their movable objects. The kevan detzricha lios kayemes, because since the whole point is that it's something that's supposed to be around to do business with, smichas olah, he is relying on it, kimekarkoi, he's relying on it just like he would rely on land. The time of the loka mishtavdi metatali diyasmi lebal chov, because the reason why movable objects, there's no lien on them for a creditor, mishum demei kara lav alayo samach, that's because the whole time he's not relying on that being around. The lav lemigvi minayo ozve, he wasn't lending money thinking he's going to collect from metaltalin, share biyad lotzian, because those are things that could be spent. Avalhani, but when it comes to this merchandise, which is for business purposes, ein biyado lahotzian, it's not something that you could just spend on yourself. V'samach alayu, he does rely on it, and therefore he is allowed to collect even from the orphans. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Chado iska, let's say you have one business venture, utrei shtari, but you write it up into two documents, pseida de malva, it's going to end up being the loss of the malva, it's going to be the loss of the lender or the balabayas. And Rashi explains, Chad iska, if it's one business venture, utrei shtari, in two documents, pseida de malva, it's going to be a loss of the lender, mishum de stam iska tilsa biagar le balabayas upalga behefsid. The way they structured these business transactions was that if there was a profit, 1/3 of that profit would go to the balabayas, it would go to the lender, but if there was a loss, he would actually take more of the loss. He would take 50% of the loss. Kedam Rebezu Neshech, this is stated in Ezo Neshech earlier, Gabeshtara de Revilish, by the document of Revilish, the ilo, because if it's not structured in this fashion where you take less of the profit than of the loss, Mischazi Karibis, it's actually going to look like a situation of interest. Why is it a situation of interest? The Kevan de Palga Milva, because the 50% that's a loan, Ilav de Shakal Monsa Beigra de Palga Pikadin, if not for the fact that he was going to take the profits from the other 50%, meaning the owner, the Balabayas, is getting the profits from that part which is a Pikadon, so if not for those profits, he wouldn't have given that loan at all. Ishtakach de Katarach Bepikadon, so it comes out that the manager, the reason why he's making an effort in terms of the Pikadon part where he doesn't see the profits, why is he making all of this effort? Mishum Ribis de Milva, he's doing that because of the interest, because he wants to get the loan. Essentially, the effort he is taking in order to make profits on behalf of the Balabayas is in order that he's extended a loan on the other 50%. And so therefore, if it would be exactly equal, if he would take, if the owner would take 50% of the profits and 50% of of the losses, what essentially would be happening is that he's extending the loan to the manager in exchange for these potential profits. That already looks like ribbis. So Hilkach, therefore, in order to avoid that, what they did was they said that actually the manager is going to get more of the profits than the losses that he would take. So Hilkach, therefore, man de yoav iska shnei chavilos begodim. So now Rashi says, let's transfer that to our case over here of what Rava just said. Again, assuming that you have a situation, let's say, where the owner is going to take 1/3 of the profits, but if there's a loss, he's going to take 50%. That's why mathematically it works out that if you divide it into two documents, it's going to be a loss to the malva. So for example, a case could be, again, man de yoav iska shnei chavilos begodim b'mona. Let's say a person is given business transaction, he's given merchandise, 2 bundles of clothing, and they're worth a money. And so Rashi continues, Nichtov shtar shel monah. Let's say they write up a document of a monah, which is 100 dinars. Imafsid ba'achas min hachavilos midmei hakeren mechamishim hey dinarim. So let's say that first bundle, which is worth 50 dinarim, let's say there's a loss of 5 dinarim. Umistaker bechaverta tesvav dinarim. And let's say in the other bundle of clothing, there's actually a profit of 15 dinarim. So you have a profit of 15 in one and a loss of 5 in the other. If you'd add that all together, it would essentially be a profit of 10. Ein kan cheshbin lahefsid levad v'leschar levad. If you're writing it all up into one document, so you're not going to say how much of a loss was there in this bundle and how much was a profit in the other bundle. You're going to say what was the total profit. Elenistaker bepragmat yazu yodinarim. What you're going to calculate is a total profit in all of the merchandise of 10 dinarim. That's what's going to happen in such a situation. And then Rashi continues, then in terms of dividing it up, v'yitlu ba'olav me'osam yudinarim shlish. So the owners, they're going to take 1/3, as we said. So they're going to take 1/3 of 10 dinarim. Shein gimel dinarim u'shlish dinar. That adds up to 3 dinarim and 1/3 of a dinar. V'hamekabel yitol shnei shlishim. And then the makabel, the manager, he's going to take 2/3. That's what's going to happen if it's all in one contract. So in such a situation, essentially the owner is going to profit. That's the lender. The lender will profit 3 1/3 dinarim. Now, let's say you would write it as 2 documents. Let's say you're going to write 2 documents on each bundle, one on each bundle. Kol chavila shtar shel chamishim. Every single bundle is going to be 1 document of 50. So then you're going to have to calculate one as a loss of 5 and the other as a profit of 15. So nimtza cheshbon shel kol echad levad. You're going to do the calculation separately. V'yakabel olav hamalva behefsed hachetzi shu shnei dinarim v'chetzi. What's going to happen is the lender on the one that was a loss, he's going to have to share 50% of the loss. That's a loss of 2.5 dinar. Uvischar shel chavert, and then in the other one where there was a profit of 15, he's going to take 1/3. That's going to be 5. Uvischar shel chavert lo yitol ela shlish. He's going to just take 1/3 of that. So essentially, his total is going to be 5 minus 2.5. That's going to be only a 2.5 dinar profit. That's going to be less. That's the idea that if you divide it into 2 shtaros, it's going to be a loss for the lender. V'lo nimtza lechelko schar ela shlosha mos. It's going to come out then that it's just going to be 30 mos of profit. Dahainu chamisha dinarim. That's 5 dinarim. Means to say 5 dinarim out of the 15. That's 1/3. The dinar vav mos kesa pshite harein pseida de malva. That's a loss of the malva because again you have to take 5, but you have to subtract the 2.5. And if you want to demonstrate this with some simpler math, you can take a case where, let's say, the profits are 10 on one bundle and the losses are 10 on the other bundle. Now, if you put it all together, so a profit of 10 and a loss of 10 is going to be 0. Nothing will happen. But if you're going to say that he gets 1/3 of the profits, that's 1/3 of 10, and then he takes a half of the losses, which is half of 10, clearly the malva is going to be losing, and that's the idea why it's beneficial to put it all in one contract in terms of the malva, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Hey Amid Aleph.